everyone. Good morning. My name is Emily Kwong. I head up the Asia Healthcare Investment Banking in HSBC. Very great to meet you, and we definitely think innovation is very important for Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. I think today I'm going to talk about some key sectoral themes witnessed in the healthcare space and also some highlights on what the latest equity capital markets has been responding around our sector. First of all, allow me to do a bit of advertisement around how HSBC might be able to help healthcare companies and innovation in general. We provide one-stop shop solutions to our clients. I think one key differentiating point with other investment banks or other banks would be HSBC has a very long-term view with our clients and is able to provide very holistic solutions for them from the startup stage, pre-IPO stage in the form of debt and equity to IPO, a very significant event for your company, as well as after IPO. We are more than happy to provide all kinds of financing and structured solutions. I also have my colleague Thomas Elliott in a bit to introduce a bit more in-depth on the structured solution side for biotech and innovative healthcare companies. I think ever since I joined HSBC around 2 years ago, we have closed 7 equity transactions, including 5 IPOs and 2 follow-ons. I think the latest IPO we did was in December 2021 under very challenging market environment for a siRNA company based in Suzhou and US for the treatment of cancer and rare diseases. And then last week, we also closed a very difficult but very important transaction for a leading healthcare company, biotech company listed in Hong Kong for a equity placement. So which is very important for a cash runway for typical biotech companies needing a lot of cash in their clinical trial and innovations. So here are some of the key interesting themes observed in the healthcare space, especially after the COVID pandemic. There are a lot of lessons learned as it has had a major impact on many people's lives and touch on how the world should respond and handle the crisis. Not only the world lost a large number of lives, I think the world also has been coping with a series of economic downturn and humanitarian issues, including stringent lockdowns to various degrees, economic setback on supply chain, and so on. I think quite interesting to note one point, I think in the initial onset of the pandemic, China and Asia seems to fare much better than the West, because probably we have better experience with SARS and avian flu and so on in the past. But I think over time, 2-3 years down the road, we realized that there's actually really no clear winner in this battle. And we got to find a way to balance out political and economic agenda for ourselves. I think most of the world is getting back to normal. We hope there will be more restrictions on traveling and business, but I think the COVID-19 pandemic has placed the public health under very tremendous stress, calling for the need of a systematic reform and ongoing evaluation so we can better prepare for the next potential pandemic if that happens again. I think the bigger question being raised is how to enhance more partnership and coordination between the public and the private side. As we know, the public healthcare system has been pretty overloaded and assuming most of the budget pressure. I think on the private players, including the multinational farmers, we have been expediting our clinical trial and innovation, especially on the COVID-19 vaccine. And so it also reviews the global supply is actually very vulnerable as well for the public health crisis. And so there was we witnessed a shortage of hospital beds and medical supplies and so on. And so I think for many countries, it's a question for us to keep adjusting our infrastructure and policies to adapt to any future crisis. I think the second pretty interesting theme in our sector would be we are seeing many more up-and-coming innovative therapies, not just for COVID-19 and infectious diseases, but for a wider spectrum of unmet medical needs. And I think just now we saw the panelists discussing mRNA and very validated targets or antibodies I think before COVID, mRNA actually was more contained in an academic settings and not widely approved or adopted in other diseases such as oncology or autoimmune diseases. However, after COVID, I think many global pharma are putting billions of dollars into investing this mRNA as a promising runway and to put into more pipeline drugs for mRNA for cancer, diagnostics testings, and other infectious diseases in a more broad setting. And I think recently we also see some breakthrough progress in cell and gene therapies. As just now we heard the speaker on Johnson & Johnson mentioned, to name a few, I think CAR-T has been emerging as a very promising therapy for hematology and blood cancer. For example, Legend Biotech, which is a Chinese-based company listed on the NASDAQ, which has been using their own innovation and R&D effort to get a very strong partnership with Johnson & Johnson to roll out their commercial products for blood cancer. So it's a very well-validated target, and we're awaiting more progress for CAR-T to address solid tumor, not just blood cancer. And I think policymakers and venture capitals are also placing increasing emphasis on preventive medicine and early diagnostics in order to push down the huge burden of treatment costs, especially for the benefit of identifying the disease earlier, for better management of the disease and for physicians and patients. I think as a result of more progress of point-of-care testing technologies and immuno-oncology treatments, we're seeing more, if not all types of cancer being progressed into more a chronic disease rather than purely untreatable. And then I think another significant trend would be we're seeing in digital health. We're seeing much more combination of technology into healthcare. So in a broader settings, we think digital health can imply and encompass mobile health, telehealth, or telemedicine, where we can facilitate patients not necessarily going to hospitals, and especially for those not that emergent and urgent diseases. On the other hand, we're also seeing more hybrid business model that integrates digital health, for example, medical insurance and payment, pharmacy benefit management in the US. I think the representative names in this space would be Teladoc and Amwell in the US. And in China, we're also seeing more emerging models like WeDoctor, JD Health, etc. I think the last or the fourth trend that we are seeing as well would be some medical innovation and technologies that would be being developed to improve the overall industry's efficiency and scalability. I think we all know that a typical drug discovery process would take at least 10 to 15 years and then involving tens of billions of investment for a drug to get approved. And actually many of those drugs wouldn't get approved after a very long investment period. So we're seeing some interesting AI drug discovery model like in silico and some other US bigger AI drug discovery companies to try to cut the chase into early stage of the discovery of the compounds and the targets in order to make the process more certain and to expedite the drug development process, which is a very innovative model. The other aspect would be with the life sciences tools and big data. I think this is an area where we're talking about cell biology and molecular biology and biochemistry. So I think the global life sciences tools market, it would include a wide range of instruments, consumables, and reagents. And you must have heard of Illumina, Thermo Fisher, and QIAGEN in this category. In the Asia healthcare space, just to touch on a bit of the highlights, I think each country or jurisdiction has a bit of their own characteristics, and we touch a bit upon on China already. I think we're seeing a lot more innovation in the Greater Bay Area in China with a mix of various subsectors. And we think China has been transitioning very well and successfully from a very generic drug model into much more innovation. In particular, we think CRO is doing very well. It is becoming one of the very competitive player with a lot of the global CRO, with the conventional model as well as some disruptive model, as I mentioned, on the AI drug discovery and other technologies. On Southeast Asia, I think people are trying to think about medical tourism in particular. I think once the COVID restrictions would relax, I think we are seeing much more medical tourism probably normalize and back to the old age. And at the same time, we're also seeing Chinese companies trying to set up their operations or manufacturing sites in Singapore and other Southeast Asia too. I think that's one of the key reasons that they could try to go outside of China, as well as trying to mitigate some of the geopolitical risk. And for India, I think we're also seeing continuing interest in the space on doing API and generics. This is no question about the particular characteristics of India. However, we're also seeing more technology being combined into the model and doing more data analytics into tracking the patient data and helping pharma companies to identify more the molecules earlier. And for South Korea and Japan, I think quite particular for South Korea, we are seeing a much more interest from private equity and public investors into medical aesthetic beauties. We're seeing a lot of the Botox or laser treatment energy technology being introduced into the competitive global landscape, and people are also trying to bring that technology more to the emerging markets. Lastly, on Australia and New Zealand, we think a very strong pathology and diagnostics market. In particular, a lot of PE and the investors are very interested in this kind of model. The particular names that we always would have heard about, Sonic Healthcare or IMED Radiology, which is very specialized into a certain particular focus like cancer treatment and all that. Going back to Hong Kong, I think the Hong Kong Exchange has definitely opened a very exciting avenue for biotech or healthcare companies to tap public funding. I think in the past 3 years, we are seeing a booming number of healthcare IPOs, which raised a total of $34 billion since 2018. Of course, a lot of them are non-Chapter 18A, more traditional healthcare companies. But actually, half of the components or the applicants and the listing candidates are from the biotech and more innovative, disruptive technologies. The market is not very helpful these days, but we're still seeing a lot of A1 being filed into the exchange. And then in terms of the therapeutic areas, we see oncology being one of the major focus, followed by autoimmune diseases and other ophthalmology and infectious disease and so on. I think the exchange, other than NYSE or NASDAQ, Hong Kong is trying to become another listing venue for a lot of innovation. A lot of international companies and also the leading players in the healthcare space are trying to list in Hong Kong. So we are seeing a very influx of leading companies in different areas, whether you're talking about CAR-T, cell and gene therapies, or even ophthalmology, and different leaders in that field to list in Hong Kong. I think despite the current challenges we see in the market, we do see healthcare having a very defensive nature. And so in the longer run, we're actually helping companies to return to more rationalized valuation. So actually helping companies to grow more healthily in the longer term. And at the same time, I think we're also seeing some US companies trying to get a listing back to Hong Kong, purely also because of the geopolitical tension between some countries. But we think it's also very good for some companies to capture more runway in other listing venue in case they have global trials and they have a lot of funding needs locally as well as in the US. So we touched upon this point. I think healthcare sector has witnessed a very challenging setback in recent 1 year or 18 months. But since May this year, we're seeing slow signs of recovery and with more positive sentiment. And in HSBC setting, we receive the reverse inquiry saying, which are the more fundamentally good companies, both in the listing venue or even in a private settings, in the pre-IPO companies. So I think investors are having more revived appetite to look for companies with good fundamental. This page, we're talking about investors are also shifting appetite. In terms of the market landscape, I think investors are eventually more looking for companies with track record and solid revenue generation capabilities. And in that category, I think investors definitely have a more favorable trend towards CRO, CDMO, because they always serve a lot of global pharma and biotech. And in terms of the second category, we are seeing companies with traditional business model, distribution channel, but they're having more innovation into their portfolio would be very well received by investors too. The third category I'd like to mention would be healthcare services. I think a lot of the investors would also be inquiring into services model which have a specialized focus. So far we have seen companies with IVF treatments or oncology treatments being successfully listed in Hong Kong. And going forward, we're seeing a differentiated model going forward, even on hair transplant or dental in different specialized medical services. I think lastly, to conclude, before I conclude my presentation, I think the low valuation right now in Hong Kong is making a lot of companies and investors alike to reevaluate the valuation they have. And then because of the valuation getting more reasonable, I think people are having a lot of rumor targets, or there would be definitely more activities in the M&A space. People would be talking about merger or any partnership within this paradigm. So actually, many companies are trading at their very low percentage of the 52-week high. So that's basically concluding my presentation today. I think we are very happy to see HSBC being part of the partner for a lot of the healthcare and biotech companies and be able to ride on the innovation journey with you together.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. I think when I last spoke here, I had to wear a mask, so very pleased that I can breathe a bit better this time. So Emily's covered the kind of wider market, etc. One thing I wanted to touch on, and it really came through quite prominently in the last session, is around financing, getting capital, and from a bank's perspective, how we look at risk. And I think the buzzword here, obviously, in the title of the wider event is innovation. And ourselves in the finance sector, we're not immune from that need to innovate as we help our clients move forwards. So one thing we launched late last year, which is actually very, very different for us at HSBC, is a $700 million healthcare fund focused on the GBA. And this fund is a very different approach to how we lend money, how we take risk. So traditionally, we would look at companies, what is your last 3 years audited financials? What's your track record of profitability, etc. This fund is a very, very different approach with different parameters where we actually have appetite to lend to pre-profit companies that are much earlier in their life cycle. And we're looking at a different way of how we actually support those companies, many of the companies that are here today, and the kind of profile that's going to be so important for the sector going forwards. So our fund, some of the key parameters, whether for new or existing customers of our commercial bank here in Hong Kong, it doesn't matter if they're based outside of Asia, if they're in China, etc. As long as they're wanting to use our balance sheet and want borrowing here in Hong Kong, we can cater to these clients. We look specifically at 6 subsectors, so contract services, pharmaceuticals, healthcare services, medical devices, health tech, and third-party medical institutions. And then obviously there's more prescriptive lists of the subsectors within those different categories. We can go as early for backing firms that are at Series A. So as long as they're in that initial fundraising round, they're looking to bring in venture capital, private equity backing. that is something we're able to come in on. And we can provide different types of financing, both growth and working capital financing, provided there's a proven business model that sits within there. So from a kind of client lifecycle perspective, where does this financing come in? We come in very much in that red box, so not right at the startup phase. We obviously, as a universal bank, we're here to help with general banking services, etc. But in terms of us putting money out, taking actual risk, etc., we're now able to do that at Series A. And I must confess, before we launched this 12 months ago, we'd be in that grey box, traditional bank lending, and we wouldn't be taking risk and actually putting capital out to support companies at that earlier stage. So what do the kind of solutions look like that we're able to offer? Well, right at the earlier end, where companies are burning cash, they need that kind of working capital lifeblood. Typically, we come in with trade facilities, revolving facilities, structured around the receivables or the basic expenditures of the company. And then as the company progresses through its life cycle, it matures, it kind of obtains future rounds of funding. We're then bringing in more structured solutions, so revolving, term loans, and progressively through the kind of M&A, expansionary kind of structures, and even bridge to capital markets. And I think Emily touched on the exact perspective we have at HSBC and why we decided to launch and take this $700 million risk. It's for the long term. So we're very much using this fund as an incubator. It's something we're looking to feed Emily's investment banking franchise with by taking positions with companies 2, 3, 4 years ahead of their kind of maturity and IPO type event. And because we've put that risk out there, we expect to know the founders, the management team very well, grow with the company, and help support them as they scale up. So how do we look at it? I mean, the key parameters really are, we're obviously looking at the quality of the business model, the management team, who's backing the company, and then it's all around cash burn. So, very simple diagram here showing what's the cash balance the company has from investment, fundraising, etc. We then forward model and understand its go-forward expenses, the working capital consumption, planned capital expenditures, and with that buffer that's left, we structure the financing around these flows. So we work with the company in helping model this. I think it was mentioned in the earlier session, a lot of founders and at that earlier stage don't necessarily have that financing expertise. So again, that's why we put a team together specifically focused on this to help work with businesses as we structure the solutions to help them. And I think clearly, as companies are looking at their fundraising strategies, especially in the current market, current climate, we're very conscious. Equity is very expensive. There are challenges around fundraising. We see this as a very unique market offering that can come in. It's non-dilutive, as I said at the start, so it's not going to change those shareholder structures. The cost is very competitive because it's still debt finance. It's not as high as expensive as some of the hybrid or equity solutions you would see. So we believe it's a very, very compelling offer for clients. So in terms of eligibility, I already mentioned the sectors we look at. We are looking for high growth companies in that second category and a decent revenue base to start with, typically. As I said earlier, Series A and beyond, and we're looking for that kind of venture capital, private equity backing that's coming through. Some kind of commercialization, a decent valuation, and then we're looking at a cash position with that forward modeling that will cover our operating loss. I would say there's always nuances in these kind of situations, so we're very happy to talk to clients that have got different perspectives. We've even had conversations with some pre-revenue clients where there's certain structuring or different approaches we've been able to take. But typically from a kind of start point, that's where we've parameterized our fund for deployment. So some indicative terms, the ticket sizes we can do in the fund, some are as small as $1 million or less, but we can go right up to $50 million. As I mentioned, from a kind of continuum of solutions, we can very much start at kind of very basic cards, working capital for the kind of lifeblood expenditure of the business, but then we can go right through to kind of more structured event acquisition, pre-IPO type financing. We would do 12 months as a usual tenor, but we can, again, for Series B and more mature companies, bring in some longer tenor solutions as well. The pricing, as I said earlier, is very, very competitive. When you compare it to the cost of raising equity and hybrid solutions, this remains bank debt. So it's a typical upfront fee, a margin above a base rate, and then a renewal fee. And some of the security we look for: assignment of receivables, pledge of cash, share pledge, sometimes a parental or personal guarantee, but that's increasingly more difficult given there's normally a diverse shareholder base. But again, we can bespoke and look at different kinds of solutions and structuring. And these are some of the typical covenants and undertakings, which I won't go into too much detail on, but very happy to talk to anyone afterwards, or indeed kind of post the event if anyone has interest in more details. And just a couple of indicative case studies to conclude, so you have a feel for some of the things we've done since launching last year. We've done a $35 million clean import loan to provide working capital support for one client. That had a parental guarantee from the parent company, but no personal guarantee. We've done a $30 million revolving loan for repaying shareholder loans pre-IPO, so quite a specific use of proceeds there, different to the usual kind of working capital lifeblood. And we've done a $16 million clean import loan, again, for working capital support. I think it's worth saying as well, we're very much looking at this as a through-the-cycle approach. We recognize there are challenging conditions there, but we're discussing live cases now for companies, pre-profit companies looking to make acquisitions, et cetera. For us, we've allocated and we've parameterized this $700 million fund, and we intend to deploy it, notwithstanding a currently challenged market. We're all about, as we said earlier, backing the right companies and taking that long-term perspective. So I'll conclude there. I'm conscious of time, but as I said, would love to talk to anyone who would like more details. Enjoy the rest of the event, and thank you for having us.